All right. So today I'm talking about the licensing of hardware designs, specifically open hardware that I guess most of us are doing. So who has an open source project, open hardware published somewhere on the internet? Can I see some hands? So that's about 1/3 to 1/2. Who of you has had any thought about what license to add to that project? What you put there? It's a little bit less. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I want to apologize in front because I put a lot of text on those slides because it's a legal topic, not so much nice pictures. So yeah, again, the scope, going to talk about mostly about open source hardware projects, European jurisdiction. There's some German laws in here which I tried to translate, which are just the actual implementation of the European law into the German law. And about AI scraping. That's what this is all about. Like, how does our designs that are open on the internet, when they get ingested by big tech, how does that work? And if you are an anti-AI person like me, what can we do about that? Net in scope for this talk is technical measures like blocking scrapers or other stuff like DRM. And I'm not going to talk about patents. This is just about regular copyright law. And then the important disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I just read a lot of stuff and now make a talk about it. The question is, why should we even care about that? And for me, it feels unfair. This is the slide where I'm angry. I as a person, I create for you guys. I create for people. This is why I create things. I don't create that for big tech companies. That's completely out of scope. If companies use my stuff, I accept that. And we have a tool for that is copyleft. So if you use my designs, you can do that, but you have to give back to the community again. That's how it's supposed to work. And this kind of has been broken with how AI and big tech is doing right now, and it feels completely unfair. Like 15 years ago, people actually got to jail for torrenting stuff, and now we have OpenAI and Microsoft, whatever, downloading torrents of books and just feeding that into their LLMs. I don't think that's fair. And for me as well, it's a counterculture thing. It's us, the creators, the open source community, versus them, the big tech companies. It's like we had also 20 years back the Linux versus Microsoft movement. It feels similar to me right now. So I'm going to start with the TLDR. Can I actually protect my work if I don't want them to be ingested by big tech? And the answer is no, you cannot. It's just not possible. They're just going to do it, regardless of what the actual law is. And I made a slide about that. So where I put a few headlines together. You can read all of those, like Microsoft says, your content is freeware fodder for training models. They just take it. If it's online, they take it. We have there's a few headlines about lawsuits that are upcoming. And the thing is, a company like Getty Images, they can sue OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever. They can do that. They have the resources. And for them, it's also easy to prove that their content was ingested into AI training. We cannot do that. I have a handful of projects online, and to prove that they are in those models is basically impossible. The only way I could do that is if we know what data goes into the training. Or if for some weird reason, which I don't think will happen, the model reproduces my works exactly, which is unlikely to happen. So what is this with copyright? So the idea is when you create something, you are the author of something, you have intellectual property. As an author, that's your right. This was meant to protect creative workers. So I can actually exploit my work and get money for that when I write a book or make artwork or whatever. And that's already really interesting distinction. This was made for creatives. It wasn't made for engineers. So copyright applies to creative work. I'm going to have a slide for that in the moment and also more examples. And it's quite international nowadays, or actually since like 150 years or so. There's a thing called Berne Convention, where multiple countries came together and decided on a framework for copyright that is basically the same in all of those countries, always with exceptions. But we can look at what the Berne Convention says about copyrights. Not sure is the text big enough to read? Probably okay. So this was taken from Wikipedia. As an author, I have the right to make adaptations and arrangements of the work. And also I have the right to reproduce it in any manner or any form that I like. Those are exclusive rights for me as the author. And I can give them away. That's what licenses are. And let's now look at typical open source licenses. So most of them have a thing called share alike. I took this image from the Creative Commons. Most copyleft licenses have that, or basically all of them, because that's a basic idea of copyleft. It says you should redistribute the content under the same license. So you can take it, and if you redistribute it, you cannot change the license. And that's a quite important part of all of that, because otherwise you would download, make some kind of proprietary license on it, and then distribute it again. That's obviously not what we want as people creating open source stuff. Here's a few licenses that I put there that have that, but basically every license has that. It's probably named differently, but share alike you will basically find everywhere. And then we have another typical thing for licenses, which is called attribution. That basically says you need to display the name of the author somewhere. For example, for the CERN Open Hardware license, it says you should retain the copyright notice. So if I make a PCB, for example, and I put on it here, Carsten made that in 2005, and this is the license, you are not allowed to remove that. If you do that, you violate the license. And then you're not allowed to use it anymore, because the license is something that allows you to use it. And if you violate that, that allowance is gone. And again, this is basically all open source licenses have that. Then I have a slide for something that I don't know much about, which is fair use. This mostly applies to North America. And so far, it is not really clear if it applies to AI, if and how it applies to AI learning. There's still ongoing court cases. And those we have seen in the USA also have different results. Not sure what's going to happen there. And the idea of the fair use concept is you can use stuff without getting a license in some circumstances, very limited circumstances. Examples for that are quotes. So if I write an article and I want to quote somebody else from a newspaper or whatever, I'm allowed to put a few sentences there. I don't need a license from the person that wrote the newspaper or owns the intellectual property of the newspaper. Or another important example is teaching material. So for those, you usually also have exceptions. In North America, that's covered by fair use. In European jurisdictions, you usually have a dedicated law for that. In German, it's called Zitatrecht, and there's also exceptions for teaching materials dedicated in the Urheberrechtsgesetz for that. Yeah, and then I wrote down the 3-step test. That not only applies to fair use, but for other uses of copyrighted material as well. And so if you want to use something that has copyright on it, and you don't want to follow a license or don't want to get a license, you can test those 3 steps. And if all those tests are acceptable, then you can use it. And this is what I copied over here. I think that's also from Wikipedia. So it says, you can do that only in certain special cases. So you cannot do this in an overly broad fashion, which kind of already disqualifies AI learning because you're ingesting lots of material. It should not conflict with the normal exploitation of the work. So let's say I'm an author, I'm selling a book, and somebody else is also selling the same book. That obviously conflicts with my commercial exploitation of that. And then it should not touch the legitimate interests of the author. I'm not exactly sure how to understand that, and so I'm just gonna leave that here and not talk about it, so I don't tell stuff that's wrong. Okay, so with what we've learned so far, will large language models that have learned on that stuff, do they conform to those terms that we have? So is attribution fulfilled? I would say no. So if I go to OpenAI, use their chatbot, they don't tell about the original authors of the work that has been ingested into the learning. We don't know that. Is it share alike? Nope. Those models are commercial products. I mean, there are exceptions. Some models are open source. I haven't looked into what exact license they have, but I'm pretty sure they don't have the same license as the work that was ingested into the models. In reality, a large language model trained on the internet would have hundreds of licenses because it needs to retain all of them. That's the share-alike stuff. Is it fair use? For the North Americans, perhaps. We don't know yet. We are waiting on the court cases to decide on that. So it's not looking too good. As the next step, next chapter of this talk, I want to look into what is actually protected by intellectual property. And the interesting part is, for most of the stuff we do as hardware designers, it's not protected. Because the protection only, like you can only claim copyright for personal intellectual creations. This was written with books and artworks and stuff like that in mind. It wasn't written for engineers. Copyright doesn't protect the pure effort that you put into something. There are related intellectual property rights, at least in Germany, that protect efforts. You probably heard of Leistungsschutzrecht, if you're German speaking. But that's something different than copyright. And now the interesting question is a PCB a creative work? And it depends a lot on the PCB, but if you just do like a regular product, it probably is not. And are schematics protected by copyright? Usually not. Because a schematic is just you take predefined symbols and put them together. And that's explicitly not protected. Like taking building blocks and putting them together. As I said, effort is not protected, and so are not the ideas that you put into the schematic. So if you have a really good idea how to make whatever, an oscillator with 0 components, that's not protected. This is quite interesting actually about what is protected. One of my favorite examples is that quite a few porn movies are not protected because they're not personal intellectual creations. It's just somebody filming people having sex. It's not a creation. So this is quite interesting to see what counts as a creation or not. So I've got some examples. Those are PCBs that I made. On the right side, that is a preamplifier board and for a photonic sensor. And on the left one, that is a board that aggregates signals and manages them. Both of them are not creations in the sense of they're not a personal intellectual thing. They don't have any real recognizable design. Everybody of you that has some experience in PCB design could have done exactly the same. There's nothing special about those. So I cannot claim copyright for those. So if I put a license into my project repository for those, which I did, somebody could just take it anyway and say, it doesn't, it's not over the bar required for being in creation. You cannot claim copyright on that. I also brought 2 examples of things that I consider creative works. On the left side, that's the Stonehenge PCB. That's a further challenge that I made. Yeah, I have one over here, so you can look at that later if you like. And that thing, it has artwork on it, which makes it a creation already. And it has a recognizable design. You can say, okay, it's a copy of Stonehenge, but it's a transformative it's a transformative work, and it's not something ordinary that an engineer would do. So this is creative. And on the right side, this board is called Rework CTF. It has mistakes on it. So the idea is it's a training aid for learning how to fix mistakes with your soldering iron. And I consider that run a creative work as well, because there's a lot of my person as a creator gone into making those challenges. So it has 18 individual challenges, and that is a creation. There's an example about a schematic that clearly is not a creation that I can claim copyright on. It's just building blocks. So to summarize that, actually copyright doesn't apply to most of us engineer type persons, because what we do is not above the bar of being creative stuff. I'm going to continue and assume we made something that is creative. And we're going to start at looking at a layer which is called DSM directive. Digital Single Market Directive. That's already pretty old if you look at the date of that, 2019. And it has now been implemented in all EU countries, so it applies to all EU citizens. And there's 2 interesting articles in there. It's Article 3, TDM, that's text and data mining for the purpose of science. So the European Union made this law for text and data mining, and we're going to talk about what text and data mining is in a moment. Below that, paragraph 60D, that's the version implemented into German legislation, and then we have Article 4, exceptions or limitations for text and data mining, and 44B is the German implementation of that. The QR code brings you to the Lex EU website, which has the full text of that directive. And we can skip that because it's German, and I machine translated that with deep learning. But this is I use DeepL for that, not ChatGPT also. So I think it's a German part of the German Copyright Act, and it's about text and data mining. So it has a definition of what it is in here. It says text and data mining is the automated analysis of individual or multiple digital or digitized works in order to obtain information, in particular about patterns, trends, and correlations. And if you just take that sentence, you could argue that training of large language models, that pretty much covers it. You take stuff, put it in, you recognize patterns, trends, and correlations. Large language models are all about correlations. And then it says reproductions of lawfully accessible works. So if you can somehow get the work, is permitted if you're doing text and data mining. And then it says, yeah, you need to delete the data when you're done with text and data mining. That's the second point. So basically, this law allows you to take everything that you can access in a legal way, to take it and put it into your text and data mining. And And then the interesting one, subsection 3 over here, it says you can opt out of that. So if you don't like that to happen, it's under point 2, then you have to make a reservation, which is effectively an opt-out. And it says that must be in machine-readable form, which is going to be really interesting, because what the fuck is machine-readable? It doesn't say in the law, it doesn't say in the EU directive, and it doesn't say in the accompanying documents that the EU made for that. So with that in mind, let's say you want to do text and data mining. So I have this flowchart, and okay, I need to go back one because I missed something. So Article 3, text and data mining for the purpose of science. If basically you can just do that. If you're doing scientific research, and it's an interesting question what the definition of scientific research is, we're going to come to that in a moment as well, then you can just do text and data mining, and there's no provision for opt-out in that. So that's going to be, we're going to see that in the flowchart now. So you start there, you want to do text and data mining. Are you doing science? Then yeah, just go ahead, do it. Scrape the data, mine it. Then you're going to look, does the works that you just mined have text and data reservation? So is this opt-out written somewhere in machine-readable form? If the answer is no, then you can do text and data mining. And if there is a reservation, you can still do what the license allows. So you can follow the original copyleft license, do text and data mining, and then let the resulting model have the attribution and the share alike. That would work. So question, who has nail of text and data mining reservation and who has put it into their projects? Anyone? Yeah, me. That counts. Okay, so now we're going to look at how to actually do this opt-out. And also an interesting question is, if you have a copyleft license, the intent of the copyleft license is pretty clear, at least to me, that we're going to share it among us, each other, with the same in a fair way. And so you could argue that as soon as you have a copyleft license, text and data mining reservation applies, because that's not really compatible with copyleft. But that's not true. So Creative Commons, pretty early in 2001, when the directive came into effect, made a document. Can we read that? Yes, somehow, probably. It says the terms of the Creative Commons licenses cannot be constructed or interpreted as a reservation of right in the context of Article 4 of the EU directive. So it says if you have a Creative Commons license on it, it doesn't include a reservation with it. And the idea is, and I think that's a fair idea, it says the idea of a Creative Commons license is to allow everything as open as possible. That's why we add it to our projects. So those two things are not compatible with each other. QR code is to this document, which has quite some interesting legal points if you want to read that. And they also say something about how to actually do the opt-out. Because when we think back, it needs to be machine readable. How to do that? So the obvious thing people might come up is put it into the robots.txt of your web server. People also came up with a thing called AI.txt. And then we have a thing called TDM reservation protocol by the W3C working group. All of those are not optimal for various reasons. So, for example, robots.txt, it's tedious to manage all of that because you have probably hundreds of different scrapers and you need to put every one of them into your robots.txt and allow and disallow them. And actually, you're not allowing or disallowing machine learning or TDM, but you're disallowing access altogether. And that's probably not what you want. I mean, you want your web page to be indexed by search indexes, but you don't want same company, Google, to scrape that data to put it into an LLM. So robots.txt doesn't really work. Then AI.txt basically says exactly that. You can say disallow everything, and then you can still index it for search machines, but not ingest it into LLM learning. But the problem is, who's going to actually fetch that file? So I have that file on my web server. It got 0 fetches so far. And I have plenty of bots scraping my website. So yeah, most miners don't. And those of those require that you have access to the web server. So if you host your project on GitLab or GitHub or GitLab or whatever, you cannot do any of those methods. It's impossible. And the TDM reservation protocol is similar. It has lots of different methods. So you can do HTTP header, you can do a meta tag in your HTML. But if you're on GitHub, none of those are accessible to you. So that's not a good state of the art. I'm going to show later what I do. So I put my stuff into the README file, and I'm going to show you how I do that. Next, in this talk, I want to look at one of the lawsuits we had in Germany regarding text and data mining. That was kind of a high-profile case about not a company, but a club. It's actually a club called Lion. Who has heard of Lion? I see 0. Okay. So what they do is they scrape the internet and they make a list of URLs. So this is about pictures. They look at the pictures and sort them, and then they say, okay, this is a picture with 2 dogs, and they scrape that from the alt text and also from already existing machine learning model. You can download that list. You can go to the website and download it. If you have a website, it's quite likely that one of the pictures on your websites is on that list. For me, it's a few, I think 2 or 3 pictures. And they supply that list. So other people that want to develop an image generator can download that list and use that list for the actual scraping process. Because you can pre-select the images. You can say, okay, I want to make an image generator only for cats. So you download the list, swap a list for cats, and only download cat pictures. And yeah, a photographer that was a professional was not really happy with that and sued them. And I see my slides are out of order, so we have this slide first, which is how to use the dataset. There's a tool which is called image to dataset, which takes the list and then downloads the images for you. And it has this interesting issue with implement robots.txt. So they just don't care about the standards of the open web. So they will violate our established rules on how to do that. Okay. Going back to the lawsuit, it was not successful for the photographer. It was dismissed. And they looked at 3 interesting topics. The first one, so Lion said, this is only temporary reproduction, vorübergehende Vervielfältigung, which is perfectly fine to do because, for example, if you have a web proxy or any kind of caching service on the internet, you have to store stuff for temporal purpose. And that is explicitly allowed by the law. And they said, no, that doesn't apply. It's not really a temporary thing. What you're doing, you're downloading the images, you're analyzing them. That is a real use of the image. But then they said, okay, but Article 4 of the Digital Single Market Directive applies to Lion because the list is open. And they claim to do science. So they say, oh, we just did this for the open source community and everybody can use it. It's not commercial. This is one of the interesting topics. So they will go to the next level in the court. The photographer is not happy with that because the way that Lion gets gets money is actually from AI companies. So that's the interesting question. Is it really non-commercial? We will figure that out later, or the court will figure that out. But the really interesting stuff about that lawsuit was they wrote something about machine readable. Because on the specific case that we had here, the image was scraped from a stock photo website, which at the bottom of the website, when you look at those, it always says, yeah, all rights reserved. You cannot download those images unless you pay us. And the question is, if the website says all rights reserved, is that an opt-out? What do you think? Is it an opt-out? Hands up if you say this is an opt-out. This is an effective opt-out. I see few hands. So do the other people think it's not an effective opt-out? Who thinks it's not an effective opt-out? It's split half to half. The answer is we still don't know. So the court basically said, if it's written in natural language, in this case it said like all rights reserved, it should count as an opt-out, because if you do AI research, we can expect you to also use AI tools to read the web page and tell you what's written on that web page, which is really interesting. It's not sure if that will hold up in the upper court. We will figure it out. So we still don't know how machine readable actually works. Nobody knows. So what I currently do, so I put those two sentences in README files. So I say, you may not use this in AI datasets and so on. And I also cited the German law, which is the opt-out. So the second paragraph is the opt-out. And my hope is that this counts as machine readable, because that's the best I can do in a README file. One interesting point about that is, with this in place, it's not a free license anymore. Because to count as a free and open license, or those words are really hard, free and open, so I'm going to stick to free. It says you cannot discriminate against any fields of endeavor, like commercial use, or for example, military use. Quite a lot of people like to put, don't build weapons with my stuff in there. Then it's not free anymore, because you're discriminating against specific fields of endeavors. And that's also what I'm doing here. I'm saying you may not do anything in the development of AI stuff with that. So that was all pretty grim. I don't like what I've been talking about so far. It's no fun. So let's try to get a positive outlook. Where are we going from here? What's going to happen next? And there's a quite interesting study by the EU Parliament. The QR code brings you to the study. It's 150 pages of legalese text, so not so fun. But the interest, this study was commissioned by the European Parliament, and they basically say in the study there's a huge mismatch between what actually is happening in the real world with AI training and text and data mining exceptions in comparison to what we want, how copyright actually works, or how it was intended to work. And I have, I think, 3 slides from that study. So first one is generative AI training really text and data mining? And I asked that question earlier in that talk, and we said, yeah, pretty much the law looks like that. And the study says, no, not really. You can read it like that, but it was not intended like that. Text and data mining is something different than generative AI. They're 2 different goals. So they say the law needs to be clarified in that regard, so it doesn't apply anymore. Then they say about the TDM opt-out, like what is machine readable? They say basically the same what I've been saying. It's not clear how to do it. It's ambiguous. And it doesn't work in the real world because you cannot really communicate the opt-out. So they're saying we should probably go back to an opt-in for that, which is fair for creators, I would say. And then the last one I have is the lack of remuneration and enforcement mechanisms. It's basically, as an author, I read a book, OpenAI scraped it and used it. I don't get any money out of that. and they say, okay, we recognize this happens, and we need a fix for that. So we have this study, and it basically speaks out of my heart. It's everything I feel is wrong about the state of AI is actually in that study, which is good. I like that. The interesting question is, what will the politicians actually do about it? It's just a study. So for that to actually be part of the process of making new laws or amending existing laws, no clue what's going to happen next. Yeah, and the last thing I have is there's a pending case in front of the Central EuGH, I don't know, Court of Justice of the European Union, where a press company, it's called Like Company, it's from Hungary. They have various newspapers, and they sued Google. This thing is still pending. We don't know how long it will take, probably more than a year. And they ask about the same questions. They asked about, like, so point number 2 is the training, point number 3 is text and data mining, AI learning is the text and data mining. And the Central Court of Justice will answer that. So we will learn more about that in the future. But for now, we are stuck with the status quo. And that's going back to my, I think, second slide. Can we do anything about that? Nope. If big tech wants to take our data, our projects, they will just do it. And we don't have anything we can do about it. And yeah, that's it. I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Not a question, just a comment. At least in Hungary, we have special protections for certain engineering designs, like I know architectural and mechanical drawings, for instance, and also silicon dye photo masks. I don't know about schematics specifically, but I'm pretty sure that PCB designs would be in this category of protected things. So yeah, it's interesting to see that there's some regional variation, at least within the EU.
Yeah, I can concur. There, for example, there's in German a law called Halbleiterschutzgesetz, which explicitly protects photomasks for semiconductors. There is some protection for engineering efforts, but they're different.
Yes, I have two topics. One is the Topografieschutzgesetz, which is applicable to German with this name, also in the EU, and in the US it's called mask law. But it's not clear if in the German style, if it's sufficient to place any kind of semiconductor on a board to make it the whole board protected. That is one topic. The other one is you are mentioning these 3 elements for training AI. If you are a human and you read a book about electronics, which contains schematics, which contains probably reference layouts, and you read many of these books, then you can forget who are the authors. You don't have to think all the time, oh, thank you very much to this author. But after that, you have some knowledge about electronics and are able to construct your own schematic layout, and you can make a product and sell it to millions of customers, and you can do it as a single entrepreneur, or you can go to a big company like Google, Samsung, whatever, and say, I have a product, we can manufacture it. It's based on the books that I read from authors, from any authors, and we don't have to put any attribution to these authors. So that the learning of those AI models is the same as a human author would, a human reader would do.
Yeah, so I would put that into one single point. So you saying in AI is similar learning than a human is learning. I think the word learning is already not good. In AI is ingesting data and building correlations. I don't want to compare an AI to how a human works and thinks, but that's not your question. I think in the example of a book, if I buy a book and read it, I pay the author. So there's a huge difference in how an AI large language models now do that. They just scrape it, they take it. Yes, I could also learn from books that are free.
Well, okay, I don't have concrete examples from the point of view of books, but I know at least for music, if you make music that's just eerily similar to a popular song, you will get sued. Absolutely.
Thanks for the nice presentation. I had a question about what I didn't get. What is now the difference between copyright and copyleft?
Okay, the question is, what's the difference between copyright and copyleft? So copyright is basically the level basis on how you as an author can have your rights and how it relates to other people. That is basically the text of the layer that we call copyright or copyright laws. And copyleft exists in licenses. So I, as an author, have the what I can do is I can give you a license. I can say, give me 100 years and you can use it. That's a license. And I can also say, you can use it as much as you like and as much as you want, as long as you follow those 3 terms. And one of them is give back to the community. And that is copyleft.
Thanks for the talk. My question is, how come that software is protected under copyright and as a creative work?
Yeah, question is, why is software copyrighted as creative works and hardware is not? I cannot really answer that fully because it's really complicating figuring out what is creative works or not. So the examples that I have shown, you will probably find lawyers that will say what I've said is wrong and they have different opinions about that. But it has been somewhat established that software is a personal creation, and that has been accepted over lots of jurisdictions by now. And same for the hardware. It has been accepted that just taking building blocks and putting them together is not a creative work.
Does it actually matter where, I mean, a question of jurisdiction, because all the big AI companies are based in the US. Why scraping the web, which is not really localized, does it actually matter if it's a EU-based company or not?
Yeah, the question again is, does the jurisdiction we're in actually matter? And I don't know. That's way above what I know about intellectual property right and how to do it. What I can say, so I'm a European citizen. So if I want to sue Microsoft or whatever, I can point to the EU law because I know that applies to me. Other than that, I'm sorry, I cannot answer that.
Yeah, most laws in the EU explicitly state that if you're a foreign company working in EU territory or you're interacting with EU citizens, wherever they are, then those laws apply to you. So that's how jurisdiction usually comes in. I don't know for what's the license text for this specific article, but that's usually what they say. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also, for example, the Berne Convention. Everything you call the Western world is in the Berne Convention, and quite a lot of other countries, I think like perhaps a handful of countries in the world, are not signers of the Berne Convention, but still they implement that slightly different in their national law. So depending on where you are and what you want to do, it's quite difficult what to do. So for example, I was looking at suing the Hugging Face company, but they are in France. And if I want to sue them, it's not really clear if I can do that in Germany because they're a French company. Lawyers will probably say, "Oh, that's easy," but for me, it's not. And it gets quite complicated, this stuff.
Question is a double-ended sword. We take step models. Step models, we take it and put it on our footprints. Very often, the step models, we don't know where they came from. The step models might also be intellectual property, somebody else's intellectual property. So we take an intellectual property, step models, we bring it on a PCB, and we're creating an output which is a PCB. It's a double-ended sword because it comes back to you that you haven't respected the intellectual property of the step model, which is...
Yeah, so you're saying that if I download a step model from somewhere from the internet and use it, I don't have a license for that? Yeah, but I don't do that, for example. So I check if I have a license to use that. If you look at my projects that I showed over there, one of them has a step model that I downloaded somewhere, and I put the attribution in there. I said, I downloaded there, this is the creator, and this is the license. And I think that's the way we're supposed to do that. If you're in a commercial bit, so if you don't publish anything, nobody will know if you're not filing any license. But as soon as you publish something, it's obvious for everyone that looks at it.
Yeah, we don't have any time for more questions.
Yeah.
We could make an announcement about two things. First of all, to the thing you said, everything that's in the KiCad library has a license with which you can reuse it if you put it on your designs. So use stuff from the official library, you'll be fine. And second, and much more importantly, there's coffee.